Why is Prophet Muhammad considered controversial by some non-Islamic groups?
Of course. The controversy surrounding the figure of Prophet Muhammad in many non-Islamic communities is a complex issue with deep historical, theological, and political roots. It's crucial to preface this by stating that for over 1.8 billion Muslims, Muhammad is revered as the ideal human being, the perfect example of piety, mercy, and leadership. The perspective shared below explains the sources of the controversy from non-Islamic viewpoints, not an objective judgment of his character. The controversy primarily stems from a few key areas, often arising from a literal reading of early Islamic historical sources like the Hadith and Sira, separated from their theological context and the standards of 7th century Arabia. Here are the main points of contention. The nature of revelation and his prophethood foundational disagreement. Non-Islamic groups, particularly Christians and Jews, do not accept Muhammad as a prophet of God. This creates an immediate theological conflict. From a Christian perspective, Jesus is the final and complete revelation of God, making Muhammad's message seen as a divergent and therefore false religious claim. Source of the Quran. Critics throughout history have argued that the Quran was not a divine revelation, but was composed by Muhammad himself, influenced by his exposure to Judeo-Christian and Zoroastrian ideas in Arabia. This stands in direct opposition to the core Islamic belief in the Quran's divine verbatim origin. Military and political actions. This is one of the most significant sources of controversy. The narrative of Muhammad's life includes periods of military struggle, early persecution, and later warfare. After facing persecution in Mecca, Muhammad and his followers migrated to Medina. There, he became a political and military leader. Critics point to raids on caravans and battles like Badr and Uhud. Conquest of Mecca. The eventual military conquest of Mecca, his birthplace, is seen by Muslims as a peaceful and triumphant return. Critics sometimes frame it as a military takeover. Treatment of tribes. Specific incidents, such as the treatment of the Banu Qurayza tribe, are highly controversial. Historical accounts state that after a betrayal during a siege, the male members of the tribe were executed. Muslims view this within the context of harsh 7th century tribal laws and warfare. Modern critics often highlight it as a severe action, marriages, and personal life. Certain aspects of Muhammad's personal life, when viewed through a modern Western lens, are heavily criticized. Marriage to Aisha. The most prominent controversy is his marriage to Aisha, who, according to traditional Hadith, was 6 or 7 at the time of marriage, and 9 when the marriage was consummated. While this was not unusual in many pre-modern societies, including Byzantine and Persian empires, it is deeply troubling and unacceptable by modern ethical and legal standards. For Muslims, this is understood within its historical context, and Aisha is revered as a brilliant scholar and authoritative source of Islamic law. Multiple wives. His multiple marriages. He had 11 wives after the death of his first wife. Khadijah are also sometimes criticized, though they are explained in Islamic tradition as primarily political alliances to unite tribes or acts of charity to protect widows. Theological clashes with Christianity and Judaism, denial of central tenets. Muhammad's message explicitly denied fundamental Christian doctrines, most notably the Trinity and the crucifixion of Jesus. He also criticized certain Jewish practices and beliefs. This direct theological challenge created a basis for centuries of polemical criticism from these communities. Satanic verses incident. Some early historical sources mention a brief incident where Muhammad allegedly acknowledged 3 Meccan goddesses as intercessors before retracting the revelation, attributing it to satanic temptation. While most Islamic scholars consider the story weak or fabricated, it has been used by critics to question the divine origin of the Quran. Modern political and cultural context. The controversy is not just historical. It is fueled by modern geopolitics and cultural clashes, symbol of conflict. In an era of tensions between the West and parts of the Muslim world, figures like Muhammad become symbolic. Critics of Islam often use the aforementioned points to paint the entire religion as inherently violent or problematic. Freedom of speech versus blasphemy. The strong Muslim reaction against any depiction or criticism of Muhammad, considered blasphemy, often clashes with the Western value of absolute free speech. This clash, exemplified by events like the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, fuels a cycle of provocation and outrage, making Muhammad a central figure in a cultural war. Misrepresentation and Islamophobia. Often, the criticisms are taken out of historical context and amplified by those with a political agenda to promote fear or hatred of Islam, Islamophobia. This leads to a simplistic and negative caricature that ignores the overwhelming positive role he plays as a moral and spiritual guide for Muslims. Conclusion: the controversy exists at the intersection of theological dispute, a fundamental rejection of his prophethood; historical scrutiny, a modern, critical reading of 7th century biographical sources; cultural difference, applying modern ethical standards to a historical figure without historical context; political conflict, using his image as a symbol in contemporary cultural and political battles. For Muslims, these criticisms are based on misinterpretation, a lack of context, and often outright Islamophobia. Understanding the controversy requires acknowledging both the historical events themselves and the vastly different lenses through which they are viewed by believers and critics.
During the time of Prophet Muhammad, military engagements were often framed around 3 options: accepting Islam, paying the jizya tax for non-Muslims under Muslim rule, or engaging in battle. This framework raises critical questions. Imagine living peacefully in a society and then being confronted with a choice to convert to a new religion, pay a tax, or fight. What impact would such conditions have on the social fabric of that society? Could they foster resentment or even hatred?
Of course, these are excellent and profound questions that get to the heart of early Islamic history and its impact. Let's break them down into the 2 main parts of your query. Part 1. The 3 choices: Islam, jizya, or fight, and its social impact. Your description of the 3 conditions is a common simplification of a historical principle known from the Quran and the early Muslim state. The context is crucial to understanding its application and intended impact. The historical context. Not a random offer. This ultimatum was not delivered to just any peaceful society minding its own business. It was primarily applied in the context of war with the Byzantine and Sasanian, Persian empires. These were not neutral parties. They were expansionist, superpower empires that had previously threatened and fought against the nascent Muslim community in Medina. The Muslim expeditions were, in their view, defensive or preemptive against these major powers. Following broken treaties. Often, this choice was presented to towns or tribes that had previously agreed to a treaty with the Muslim state and then violated it by attacking Muslims or allying with their enemies. The principle is derived from the Quranic verse, Surah 9, Ayat 29. Fight those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day, and who do not consider unlawful what Allah and His Messenger have made unlawful, and who do not adopt the religion of truth from those who were given the scripture. Fight until they give the jizya willingly, while they are humbled. The meaning of jizya. A pact of protection, the jizya was not a random punitive tax. It was a concept with historical precedent. In exchange for paying the jizya, non-Muslims, specifically people of the book, which included Jews, Christians, and later Zoroastrians and others, received specific rights from the Muslim state. Exemption from military service. Their payment bought them protection. They were not required to fight in the Muslim armies, which was a mandatory duty for Muslim citizens who paid zakat, the alms tax. Autonomy. They were allowed to practice their religion freely, manage their own community affairs according to their own laws, and maintain their places of worship. Protection of life and property. The Umayyad Muslim state was obligated to defend them from external and internal threats, just as it would defend Muslim citizens. The requirement that it be paid willingly while they are humbled, Quran Surah 9 Ayat 29, is a complex phrase. Many Islamic scholars interpret humbled not as a state of personal humiliation, but as an acknowledgement of the political sovereignty of the Islamic State and its legal system. Impact on society. Would it cause hate? The impact would depend entirely on the implementation, the ideal versus the reality. The ideal, as set out in early Islamic law, was a pluralistic society, a dhimma, or protected status, where different religious communities lived side by side under Muslim rule, autonomous but peaceful. In many periods of history, like Al-Andalus in Spain, the Ottoman Empire, this system worked remarkably well and created flourishing, multi-faith civilizations with less persecution than existed in contemporary medieval Europe. Potential for resentment. However, the system was inherently unequal. Non-Muslims had a subordinate political status. If rulers were unjust and imposed the jizya harshly or beyond people's means, it could absolutely foster resentment and hate. History shows both examples: periods of great tolerance and periods of tension and persecution. The human experience would have varied greatly from one ruler and one century to the next. Part 2. Why didn't conquered societies convert back? This is one of the most significant questions in world history. The persistence of Islam in regions like Egypt, the Levant, Syria, Iran, and North Africa cannot be explained by military conquest alone. Conquest can force submission, but it cannot force sincere, lasting belief. The reasons for Islam's enduring presence are complex. The tax factor. A powerful economic incentive: Muslims paid zakat, a wealth tax, about 2.5%. Non-Muslims paid jizya. Historians have noted that the jizya was often set at a comparable or sometimes even higher rate than the zakat. This created a significant financial incentive for conversion. Converting to Islam meant switching from the jizya to the zakat, which could be a lighter financial burden. This economic pressure was a major driver of gradual, mass conversion over centuries. Gradual, not immediate. Conversion. It's a common misconception that populations became majority Muslim immediately after conquest. The process was very slow, taking 200 to 500 years in most areas. For example, Egypt and Syria remained majority Christian for centuries under Muslim rule. This long timeline shows that conversion was a gradual social process, not a sudden event forced by the sword. The appeal of the message itself. Simplicity and accessibility. Islam's core message: strict monotheism, a direct relationship with God without a complex priesthood, and a comprehensive legal and social code, was attractive to many. Social justice. Early Islamic society, in theory, emphasized the equality of all believers regardless of tribe or race, which was a powerful idea in highly stratified societies like the Sasanian Persian Empire. Spiritual renewal. For some, it represented a purer, more vigorous form of monotheism compared to the state-sponsored Christianity of the Byzantine Empire, which was often bogged down in theological disputes and political corruption. Assimilation and integration intermarriage. As Muslim Arab armies settled in new lands, they married local women. Their children were raised Muslim, slowly increasing the Muslim population. Urbanization and patronage. Islam was the religion of the ruling class. To advance in government, administration, and the arts, learning Arabic and often converting became a path to social mobility. New cities like Fustat and Baghdad were centers of Islamic culture. The collapse of previous institutions in regions like Persia and North Africa. The Muslim conquests shattered the existing political and religious structures like the Sasanian state and Zoroastrian church, the Byzantine authority in Egypt. Islam filled the vacuum, offering a new, stable identity and social order. There was often no powerful original religious institution left to convert back to, as it had been deeply integrated with the old state that was now gone. In summary, the three choices were a doctrine of war and statecraft for a specific time and context, leading to a system that could foster either coexistence or resentment. The lasting conversion of societies was not due to the initial conquest, but to a centuries-long process driven by economic incentives. The appeal of the religion itself, social integration, and the filling of a power vacuum.
Historically, after wars, many women were enslaved, and Islamic law permitted sexual relations between masters and their female slaves. Records indicate that even Prophet Muhammad had such relationships. This raises a complex and sensitive question. If a woman's father, brother, or son had been killed in battle, could her subsequent sexual relationship with her captor be considered consensual, or was it coerced? Would such acts be classified as rape, given that Islam strictly prohibits rape?
This is an incredibly important and sensitive question that touches on profound issues of history, ethics, and the interpretation of religious texts. It requires a careful and nuanced approach, acknowledging both the historical context and the deep moral concerns it raises from a modern perspective. To address your question thoroughly, we need to separate the historical and legal context of 7th century Arabia from modern ethical standards, and then examine the theological and moral implications. The historical context of slavery and warfare in the 7th century first. It is crucial to understand that the institution of slavery was a universal and entrenched feature of the ancient world. From Rome and Persia to the pre-Islamic Arabian Peninsula, it was an economic and social structure. Warfare in that era followed specific rules where the women and children of a defeated tribe were considered part of the spoils of war. To leave them without any support system, if their male protectors were killed, was often a death sentence in the harsh desert environment. Islamic law did not invent this practice, but engaged with it and placed regulations upon it that were, in the context of the time, revolutionary. The Quran and the Prophet Muhammad's teachings introduced reforms aimed at gradually phasing out slavery, not instantaneously abolishing it, a task that would have been socio-economically impossible in that world. The legal framework and the concept of what is permitted. Your question correctly identifies that classical Islamic law permitted a master to have sexual relations with his enslaved woman, often referred to as what his right hand possesses, ma malakat aymanukum. This relationship carried specific legal consequences. Any child born from such a union was free and legitimate. The mother of the master's child gained a special status called walad, mother of the child. She could not be sold and would be freed upon her master's death. This legal framework was designed to integrate captives into society. Rather than being left destitute, they became part of a household. Create a pathway to freedom. Through the birth of a child, a woman would eventually secure her freedom and that of her lineage. Addressing the core of your question: consent, force, and rape. This is the most critical and difficult part of the question. Applying modern concepts like consensual excitement or rape to a master-slave dynamic is extremely complex. Power imbalance and coercion. From a modern ethical and legal standpoint, a relationship cannot be truly consensual when one person has absolute power over the other, owning them, controlling their food, shelter, and life. This inherent power dynamic means that any sexual relationship within slavery is, by its nature, coercive. The slave's acceptance could often be a survival strategy rather than genuine, free-willed consent. The Islamic prohibition of force. You are absolutely right that Islam strictly prohibits rape and sexual coercion. The Quranic verse in Surah 4 Ayat 19 instructs men to live with their wives in kindness and explicitly states, "I do not compel them in order to take away some of what you have given them." This principle of non-compulsion is central. the theological dilemma. This creates a profound theological and moral dilemma. How can a religion that prohibits coercion permit a sexual relationship within a coercive institution? This is a central point of contention for modern Islamic reformers and critics alike. Traditionalist view. Historically, jurists focused on the legal permission, ibaha, granted by the wartime context and the ownership contract. They argued that the framework of rules, like becoming walad, provided dignity and structure, making it distinct from violent, random rape. Modern critical view. Many modern scholars and critics argue that regardless of the historical legal technicalities, the power imbalance makes the concept of consent meaningless in this context. They argue that by today's standards, it would unequivocally be classified as institutionalized rape and sexual slavery. Why didn't they ask for freedom? Your observation that many enslaved women did not immediately seek freedom is historically noted. The reasons were likely complex and practical, not a reflection of excitement, nowhere to go. As you stated, their male family members might have been killed. Returning to their tribe could mean starvation, being ostracized, or being enslaved by someone else. Economic and social security. Being in the household of a powerful master, especially if they had a child, provided food, shelter, and protection in a dangerous world. Freedom without any support network could be a death sentence. Emotional bonds. It is possible that over time, complex human relationships developed, not based on free and equal choice, but on dependency, Stockholm syndrome, or genuine affection in some cases. Human psychology in such extreme situations is not binary. Conclusion: a modern ethical perspective. It is essential to evaluate historical practices through both their own context and through a modern ethical lens. In a 7th century context, the Islamic regulations on slavery were reformist. They provided captives of war with rights, pathways to freedom, and integration into society that were unprecedented for the era. The goal was a gradual abolition. Through a modern 21st century lens, the very institution of slavery is rightly recognized as a profound moral evil and a violation of fundamental human rights. Any sexual relationship within that institution is seen as inherently coercive and exploitative. Therefore, many contemporary Islamic scholars and thinkers argue that the spirit of the Quranic reforms, which aimed at justice, dignity, and ultimate freedom, leads to one inevitable conclusion: the complete abolition of slavery is a religious and moral imperative. They argue that the historical permission was a temporary concession to a specific context that no longer exists, and its underlying principles of justice demand its end. In summary, while historical texts show the practice was permitted and regulated, a modern ethical assessment, informed by both contemporary human rights standards and the core Islamic principles of justice and consent, would lead most to view such acts not as consensual excitement, but as a deeply problematic feature of a historical institution that is incompatible with human dignity today.